Good morning. How are you? You see the water bottle in my hand, which confirms two things. First, that I am, in fact, a hypocrite, because you know that we can't have coffee up here. But I've had a lot of people bugging me like, dude, you have a water bottle. I see it all the time. So I just wanted to let you know you can have water. It's kosher. So if you're a guest with us, welcome. We're delighted at the chance to, wrestle with God and who he really is and what his dreams for the world really are with you. You've caught us on a fun, albeit unique weekend, because once a year we do something, which I say that like we've done it before, but we haven't even existed for a year, so once a year, we do something called Vision Weekend. And really the intention of the weekend is to look back and celebrate what God has done, to acknowledge the faith journey that God had us on as a community in the last year, and at the same time, to look ahead at the coming year and celebrate the stuff that we feel like, at least for now, that we can see that God has for us this year. So I'm going to pray, and we got a lot of ground to cover, so we'll jump in. God, thanks for music. It's a fun invention of yours that, just emotionally brings us in touch with you, so thanks for that. Thanks for the opportunity to sing. Thanks, God, that we're not just singing about stories, but we're singing about truth. That as hard as life makes it sometimes, God, we believe in you. We trust you there. We acknowledge our inability to get our minds around you, and yet we grasp out to you, God. We grasp onto you, and we say thanks. Thanks for Jesus. Thanks for that historical moment and the significance of that. God, I give you this morning and pray that it would be both worshipful in the fact that we reflect on what you've done and motivating as we look ahead to the next year. Pray that no matter where someone's at on their spiritual journey this morning, that they would feel your abiding presence with them, that you'd communicate with them and move them forward. God, it's in your name. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, okay, here's the way I want to frame the first part, because we're going to talk about the stuff that we had looking back, what we've seen God do. And I would submit to you that really the most appropriate way to frame it would be to say this, that, last September, about 50 people, having wrestled with the vision of planting a certain kind of church, after wrestling with the vision of being a certain kind of church in a community, about 50 people said, yep, I think God is in that. I would like to be about that. I would like to personally invest myself in that. 50 people having wrestled with not just planning a church, but a very specific kind of church that would first and foremost value gathering and scattering. This would be gathering. And wanting to lead worship services that were engaging and relevant, that were actually enjoyable to attend, something that we would proudly invite our friends to, no matter where they're at on their spiritual journey. And yet at the same time, to very quickly remind ourselves that God's dream isn't for a people who will sit in a cool auditorium on Sunday morning and tell cool stories about him from 2,000 years ago, but that God's desire is to actually, move through a community. What we call scattering. And it's our way of, and even then we talked about, it's our way of saying that a church should matter. Like if there's a church in a community, that whole community should be better off. That God is a missional God. That in Genesis 1, we see a God creating, and even before the fall, he said to people, join me. Put your hands in the soil and join me in what I want to do in this world. Move it forward with me. A God who's not just looking for peons, but collaborative creators who would contribute to creation. And then especially at Sinai, after the fall, God says to these people, I want you to be my royal priesthood, which to a bunch of former slaves in Egypt was a vivid message, because they were well aware of the Pharaoh and his entourage of priests who went around and did the king's bidding. God looking for a people who would be his presence in the world. So about 50 people said, we're invested. We're all about that. We're going to give ourselves to that in whatever way we possibly can, to trusting God in that adventure. And I think if we're going to say, let's start by celebrating what is ultimately the fruit of those people's faith and their decisions, it seems to me that a great place to start would be to hear the stories of a few of the people getting baptized this afternoon. So I invite you to turn your attention to the screens.
When I was like 8, I went to a summer church thing. My mom put me there just to keep me busy. But that was like one summer, and then after that it was just nothing. It just was never brought up. It was never a conversation ever really.
So what happened last year that led to your making a decision to follow Jesus?
It started with Young Life, and my friend just brought me to that, Campaigners, and I just kept going, and then Ben, he actually just kind of like worded it perfectly, that it kind of just like reached me. He said, you can't do anything that will make God love you any more or any less. And like, I was just like thinking about it for 2 weeks straight. A lot of it's just taught me to like love everyone, not just like my friends, and you know, like cliques or the normal high school thing. Like, it's like love everyone.
So then why do you want to get baptized?
Because that's like, the way I see it is, that's a way that like you can like outwardly express also that you're dedicating your life to Jesus and you're going to follow him.
I think I've always had a part of God, but this last year, being with Narrate and some other things that have happened, I feel a lot more presence, of Jesus, and since last winter, it's a lot of changes have gone on inside of me that I know I don't have control over it, but it feels good. I think this is the next step for me, in my walk, and I it's a feeling I have, it's something that I've thought about for a while, I'm looking forward to it, and I like barbecue, so
What's different in you now versus a year ago?
Being in the church, it's kind of helped me, and it's helped me to relax more. The sermons that I get to go see, they make me think a lot better, a lot straighter. I feel it's important for other people to know that I've given myself to God.
In the last year, we started attending Narrate, which has brought our family closer together spiritually. And for me personally, it has brought me closer to God, and I feel like I want to solidify that relationship. Am I crazy about telling the whole world about it? No, but it's kind of what I'm doing by being baptized. And for me, that's like, it's like making a commitment. That's what it is to me. And up until this point in my life, I wasn't ready to make that commitment, and now I am. See, my Jesus in my pocket. And then after I get baptized, I will feel like I always have Jesus in my pocket.
I grew up in the church. My dad's a pastor, still is, and that just kind of comes along with its own baggage. And when I hit 30, around then, I kind of renewed my relationship with God, and in a church where I was just kind of allowed to just be there and kind of grow and re-enter without a lot of pressure or anything like that. And it allowed me to kind of see God and see His heart, and which was much different than kind of the God that I grew up with. I was actually baptized as an infant, but so I kind of thought I was done on that one. I probably had about a handful of opportunities in the last 10 or 11 years to do that in various places I've lived in fellowships. But I kind of just passed it up. I didn't really think it was a crucial thing at the time. I know my wife had actually encouraged me to do that. But I think what kind of helped me change was the last Sunday, your message kind of got to me. I was thinking about, abiding and just, doing some simple things of obedience. And of course, I was kind of connected to your baptism message. I actually felt a pretty strong conviction that that's what God was actually kind of prompting me to do. So I thought, okay, well, I better do it then. And also the benefit of that it's going to see my kids seeing me do it, And I think I want to be a good example for them too. So.
The personality differences from the 11 to the 9 are hilarious. There's never any clapping at the 9. Okay, so the next logical question is, okay, Adam, so how many people are following Jesus now that weren't last year? As a result of the influence of Narrate, how many people are following Jesus today who otherwise weren't? My most candid answer, I don't know. I don't have a clean answer to that. I think there's a variety of reasons why I don't have a clean answer to that. First and foremost, because we've created a culture that I think anticipates gradual conversion. And just kind of by way of quick review of the terms, there's dramatic conversion. We see it in the text where people, they can tell you the second that they gave their lives to the Lord. I mean, it just, bam, it hit them. And they surrender their life to Jesus. There's also people, and we also see them in the text, and I would argue that the disciples seem to dominate this scene, is people who very gradually give their lives to Christ. Darcy kind of talked in those terms in her interview. People who they look back and they go, I don't know when the day was. I can tell you it was somewhere in those 3 months, somewhere in those 6 years. Some people even say, I don't know, I've always been a Christian. And us evangelicals, we have a tendency to beat those guys up, right? When in fact, they're sincerely saying, I've always had a heart for God. I've from a very early stage, understood my need for a Savior, and I've always pursued Him. So we don't have an answer because of our anticipation of gradual conversion. We don't have an answer because we've created a culture that I think wants to first and foremost allow people to belong before they believe. That doesn't require that someone pass any kind of theology test before they're a valid part of the community. And finally, we don't know why. I can't tell you why, because my accounting systems, for lack of a better term, leave a lot to be desired. Because the systems that I'm aware of, I'm just not satisfied with them. And we'll continue to hone that and mess with that, but we don't ask people to raise hands, we don't ask people to stand up, we don't ask people to do backflips, we don't ask anybody to do anything, and that's great. I have friends who do that, and I respect that. It just doesn't seem to fit the culture quite yet. What I can tell you is I could give you the names of 6 friends of mine, a part of this community who follow Jesus today who didn't a year ago. 6 people who, are personal friends of mine that I spend time with. And I suspect that you could do the same. That there's people a part of this community, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, whether it's a friend, who you could do a similar thing with and go, yeah, they've started following Jesus this year. The stories that really dominate the scene, if we're to be honest, are much more the disillusioned. The people who a year ago were disconnected. It wasn't an issue of belief. It wasn't an issue of faith. It was an issue of hang-ups with the institutional church. It was hang-ups with, they just didn't see the point. It felt to them like a business that was all about self-perpetuating itself than anything else. There's lots of those stories. I have a 20-something friend who told me personally, Adam, my faith, it's not in my way anymore. It's not an inhibitor to me. It's not awkward to me. What is that? It's a 20-something person who sincerely desired to follow Jesus and yet found his culture providing challenges that, Jesus didn't face. And so having to have permission to wrestle through some of that stuff. Maybe to get rid of some oppressive theology. I have another friend who emailed me through the My Story email and just said, Adam, I don't know. I've been a Christian for a long time. What I can tell you is I've never interacted with Jesus on a personal level like I do now. There's stories like these, and I would like to read you one. We started attending Narrate last October. I was interested in checking it out, but didn't really think it would be different than any other church I'd attended since starting to follow Jesus 20-some years ago. I sat in that service and frankly, I wasn't bored. It was engaging and refreshing. Ideas and concepts that my husband and I had been talking about for several years were being shared. Ideas like organic kingdom living. We hadn't called it that. We weren't that cool. I don't think of myself as cool, by the way. When I was in high school and didn't follow Jesus, cool and following Jesus were incompatible, so I don't delude myself. But it was the same idea. Just living life with Jesus and letting that affect our friends and coworkers and family. I came to realize that I'd been going to church for years because that is what good Jesus girls do. I knew my faith was slowly fading away, and I'd quit caring that it was dying. I even started wondering if God really existed. but I knew that I'd better stay in church and take my kids, or they might grow up to be axe murderers or something horrible. So we kept going, but with very little real change to my heart or our life as a family. I'd just given up on the whole Christian thing as far as real heart-level changing went. I knew I was a Christian, but life was just too hard to add all the perfect Christian woman ideas that I'd been taught to believe made the perfect model of Christian living. Things like homeschooling, great for others, not for me, plus we didn't even send our kids to Christian school, just good old public school. And the Proverbs 31 woman, too many things to list that I don't really measure up to. I just didn't fit the mold of a good Christian wife, mother, and woman. Sometimes I yell at my kids. Who are these people? Who does that? Just kidding. My husband cooks. My wife does it all the time. I'm just kidding. My husband cooks just as much as I do and is often better at it. I'm always behind on laundry, and my house alternates between not too bad and looks like a tornado hit. I spent a lot of years fighting against how God made me. In the last year, I've started to see that maybe, just maybe, God has a place in his kingdom bringing for someone like me. My faith is no longer dying. It has been renewed. Wow, that would be bad, wouldn't it? It's gone. It was just dying, now it's dead. Way to ruin the moment, Adam. God loves me, and he likes me. He's reminded me that I'm not an embarrassment to him. Those are the stories that dominate the scene, if we're to be honest. In fact, I'm going to ask you to do something that I don't typically ask, but it's Vision Weekend, so we can do all kinds of stuff. If this is you, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand. But how many of you, a year ago, didn't have a community that you were mattering with, a community that you were pursuing Jesus with? How many of you would that be true of you? Yeah. Those are the stories that give me goosebumps, you know? Dallas Willard, one of my favorite Christian thinkers, who's a professor of philosophy at USC, so he kind of knows his way around thought and reason. He said in an interview I was listening to this week, when someone asked you, why do you follow Jesus? He said, my favorite answer is to say, oh, well, who else did you have in mind? It's a very honest thing, isn't it? What he's saying is, when I scan the human landscape, there's no one else more worthy of trusting, both that he's God and that his way of living is the best, that it restores the full humanity. So again, an uncomfortable question. How many of you may or may not have called yourself a Christian a year ago, but most certainly wouldn't have? How many of you would become more serious? How many of you would say, I'm following Jesus now and I wasn't a year ago? Raise your hand if that's you. Yeah. We said, what if we planted a church and we just once in a while looked back and said, who started following Jesus? We also said, let's matter. Let's not become about our buildings and our stuff and our services and our music and our preaching and our chairs and our coffee and lack thereof. Let's not do that. Let's be the kind of church that the most ardent critic of Christianity would truly be bummed if we cease to exist. That in our community, if we cease to exist, someone would start knocking on doors and going, where are they? Where are they? Because there's such tangible value brought to the community. That started by saying, the other thing to note is we didn't really know how we were going to do that. We didn't really have a clue, frankly. We just said, maybe if we just pay attention. Maybe God will give us opportunity and then we'll respond to that. And so we watched the newspaper, and the first thing that came up was the city wanted to develop some parks, and so we got a meeting. I always say we because I want to be inclusive of you, but I'm caught with the tension that the fact that sounds neurotic. Like, it wasn't we, it was me, and I sound like the guy who wants to burn Korans. Like, I watched an interview and he's like, we, and it's like, no, it's not we, it's you, dude. It's you that wants to, anyway. So, you know what I mean, right? I said, can we help with that? They said, sure, help with that. I think they were testing us. We worked on a barn for them that they're trying to turn into a city kind of picnic place, real cool place in the woods. And then we noticed that the pine beetles are kind of a thing. And we looked at the landscape and we went, wow, there's a few dead trees around here. Maybe we can help with that. And we got a meeting. And again, we got a meeting. And they said, there's these 100 acres that we want to thin. Would you help us mark those? Because we need to thin them and we don't have the manpower. At least you'll save us some coin if you'll help them mark them. So a bunch of you over a few Saturdays helped mark trees. After that, the city, to their credit, said, it'd sure be nice if we didn't just leave those trees laying on the mountain or chip them. It'd be nice to give them to the working poor so that they can heat their homes. But they could only get that far because they obviously don't have the labor to get them split and distributed, and so they teamed up with LEAP, which is a low-energy assistance organization in town. But LEAP, again, went like, we don't have the manpower to split them, and so we said, we'll split them. And, about 50 cords of wood over the course of the winter were split by you all. To put that in perspective, Leap nearly doubled their distribution, just shy of 100 cords of wood last winter. So, good job. And then we also got to do this Christmas tree thing, where the city said a lot of the trees that we're thinning are fir trees, but then they're not pine beetle infested. They're actually very good. They make good Christmas trees. So if someone wants to help distribute those, and we said, yeah, we think we can do that. And you all entered into your homes and offices and neighborhoods and located single mothers and people who either it's too emotionally exhausting or too financially exhausting to go get a tree, and we took them trees. By the way, funny tangential story, which we don't really have time for, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The guy from the city was telling me that, when after they thinned the trees, the wind blew a bunch of trees down. And Brad told me that literally he had a guy call him and say, hey, did you notice all those trees that were blown down? And he said, yeah, I did. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just the wind. And the guy said, well, could you just stand them back up? He was serious. Just plop them back up. They'll be all right. Anyway. And then one of our crazy friends, Steve, who has connections that most humans don't have, he got a call from Walmart that they said, hey, we've got these 40-some bikes that are slightly broken. If you guys wanted to repair them, we'll give them to you. We said, okay. So we had this barbecue and we fixed bikes, and over Easter, families, the working poor got some new bicycles. We had the climbing wall at Alive at 5, pretty much every time the weather allowed, which felt like 3 times. But it was there a lot, right? I guess I say this. You've mattered. Good job. We said, let's not define success by our ability to fill an auditorium only, or at all. Let's define it by the tangible value that we bring to our community, whether people are connecting with God's church and with himself. Way to go. The question becomes, how did we resource it, or how did God resource it? I like the tension of kind of putting those two together. Here's some numbers. Our costs last year were $369,000. It's not monopoly money. That's a lot of coin, right? That extends 16 months, May of 2009 through August of 2010. Our intention was to have a fiscal year budget that started in September and ended in August. We started in May, so that required that we have a 16-month budget. The government didn't like it, so we put up with that. But for our purposes, we had a 16-month budget that we spent $369,000, $100,000 of which is portable church gear, Sunday morning stuff. Where'd that come from? Well, $250,000 came from our mothering churches, Billings, Bozeman. $250,000. That was up front. That was like one time. That was like the teat has dried up is what that was, right? Like, here it is. Don't return. It still leaves a deficit. Where's the rest come from? Our giving last year was $181,000. I say that to go, at Church Planners Boot Camp, one of the things they said, and it was really uncomfortable for me, but I get it now. They said, Adam, you'll know if somebody is with you on the launch team, if they're given. $181,000, you guys. Look around. There's not 400 people in the community. There's a couple hundred. And what that tells me is, good job. I don't know who's given what, and we'll talk more about that later. All I can say is, way to go. Because I recognize the financial times we've been in, and so, way to go. Proud of us. I remember sitting around before I moved my family going, oh, Lord, are we going to have any money? And I remember sitting around with the council last September going, oh, guys, think we'll have any money? Think we'll still be around in January? And I remember sitting around in November going, oh, guys, think we'll still be here at Easter? And then, right, like, you can see the pattern, like 4 months, I'm told. That's about as far as you can see. Way to go. We also said it should be fun to not take ourselves too seriously, which I would submit we have not. So we had some fun. Okay, so let's talk about this year and where we think what mountains God might have for us this year. I think it starts with this building. As I think about vision in this next year, it starts with this, for reasons that I suspect you're experiencing as the last couple weeks. I'd like to kind of tell the backstory of this, because it's kind of crazy. In early 2008, I was still living in Billings, and we were still just dreaming about this. And I would come to Helena once a month and meet people and hang out with people and scout things out, And very quickly, it became apparent to me that like this would be an ideal location for us. And particularly, Because not just because of the ambiance for us on a Sunday morning, but because at that stage, the vision was very much to gather in a space where we could matter, where we could make a tangible difference in a way that not just Narrate Church would benefit, but the whole community would benefit, which therefore requires something like a high school auditorium or a high school gymnasium or a public theater like this, where we're investing in it both in our sweat equity and in like capital resources, sound systems and stuff like that. That, a year or two down the road, the community would have a school concert or some kind of assembly or something like that, and it would be a better event because a group of people who follow Jesus believe that God calls them to, make a tangible difference in their community. So that was the vision. Therefore, this became a very cool idea. So me, in all my ignorance, I picked up the phone. I was standing in my friend Papu's store at 406. I picked up the phone. I figured out that the owner of this, or not the owner, but the leader of this place was a guy named Tom. I picked up the phone. I called Tom. I said, "Hey, Tom, my name's Adam. Me and some friends want to plant a crazy church. We'd like to rent your building on Sunday mornings." It's pretty literally how I said it, which you're all going like, "You're a moron." And I'm going, "Yeah, that's kind of the point I'm going to make." He goes, nope, click. So a couple months later, I finally realized how dumb that was to ask that question over the phone. And so I thought, well, I can deal with that. And so I just walked over here a couple months later. Is someone like dying down there, or what is happening? Back and forth. Okay. So a couple months later, sorry, lost my train of thought. I decided I'm just gonna walk over there. Like, I'll just ask him. So I walked up to the front door, walked up to the receptionist like she knew I was and I who knew Tom was, and I said, "Hey, I need to talk to Tom accordingly, please." And there's like a high school kid standing there. He's like, "Oh, I'll take you down to his office," which everyone who you can appreciate that. So cool. And so he takes me down there, and Tom comes walking out of his office, and he looks at me like, "Oh, geez, what did this guy get me into?" So I shake his hand. I said, "Hey, Tom, my name's Adam. We'd like to plant a church and meet here on Sundays." He kind of giggled, and he said, "That's funny. A guy just called me a couple months ago and asked if we could do that." I said, "Yeah, that was me." He said, "No." The answer is no. I said, "Could I have 20 minutes to share the vision of that, to talk a little bit about that?" "Sure." He said, "I got to walk over to Park Avenue Bakery and get myself a loaf of bread." I'm not kidding. And so you can walk with me. So he's walking fast, and I'm keeping up, and just but I started to share with him all that. And I would say things like, "Hey, Tom, we could take our, thousands of dollars worth of sound gear, and we could shove it in a trailer during the week. Or we could install it, and we could share it, and the community could use it. Tom, we could take our projector, and we could stow it away." And he started finishing my sentences. Or you could use it, or we could use it. "Precisely," I said. "Okay, I'm on it," he said. He went to the city. City said no. Nope, not doing that. No subletting, nope. So we ended up at the Cinemark, which we're thankful for. Then this last fall, we're getting ready for Christmas Eve, a few months out, and we've learned from the corporate headquarters that doing Christmas Eve services at the Cinemark was not an option. So I pick up the phone, I call Myrna Loy, I call to Grand Street. Tom and I had maintained a friendship, by the way, and Myrna Loy said no, Grand Street said yes, so okay, cool. So we're working on the details of that a few days before Christmas Eve, and Tom says, "Hey, Adam, if this goes well," hint, hint, caveat, caveat, "if this goes well, we should talk about next year." "Okay," I said. That's all the door opening I needed. So January rolls around, and I send an email. "Hey, Tom, want to talk about that?" February, "Hey, Tom, want to talk about that?" March, "Hey, Tom," I kind of learned, you just got to be a bugger. And so here I go. April, "Yeah, let's talk about that." And here we are. And on Tuesday, I called him and said, "Tom, I need a meeting with you later in the week." "Okay," he said. I said, "We just want to talk about what stuff you have in mind that we can do for you and for your staff and for the facility." "Okay." So we had coffee Thursday afternoon, and he's giddy. The opportunity to matter. And so I think this place and the opportunity to serve here and scatter here is going to be tremendous, because the goal is that someone will sit at one of the 2 p.m. shows on Sunday or the Friday night shows on Friday night and look around and go, "Wow, sure don't like Jesus, and I really hate the church, but I'm starting to rethink that because of the tangible difference being made in this venue." Our relationship with the city is intact. We'll continue to matter, particularly through Pine Beetle stuff. There's already been conversations about wood splitting. There's already been an invitation to do the Christmas tree thing again. Awesome. So we'll do that. But really what I want to do is shine a little bit of light on a few of the new scattering things that I think will be about. The first one deals with fatherlessness. Say that one 5 times fast. There's a lot of S's in there. It's a big deal, you guys. And I'm not going to get real heavy on statistics this morning. Many places acknowledge the idea that 95% of the men in this country who are incarcerated grew up in homes where there was no dad. It's the biblical orphan and widow. And we have to somehow serve them in a way that doesn't make single parents a pariah, or, like that we don't look at them like they've got 3 ears. Acknowledge that some of them are that for reasons completely outside of their control, and frankly, it doesn't matter why they're that. And at the same time to go, we got to help those kids. What we've developed is a strategic partnership already with Big Brothers Big Sisters, where they're like open arms going, yeah, give us all the bigs you can give us, which is a 1 to 2 hour a week commitment. They welcome couples, they welcome families, or you can just go over a lunch hour. And we'll talk more about this. But as we talk about scattering, this last year, we really emphasized, community stuff, tangible, stuff, humane type of stuff, because we think Jesus cares about that. And yet we wanted to find opportunities to also matter in very personal, relational ways, where the motive isn't proselytizing people, but loving people and trusting how God uses that. Marriage mentoring is another big one. If you weren't here for the last weekend of August and heard the Schroeders talk about that, I would encourage you to. But I just want to say this. Prepare and Enrich is a resource that, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to help marriages. What you have to do is have a moderately healthy marriage, and therefore you're equipped to use the resource to help marriages. And we can talk details about that, and we will later. But imagine the next time you're sitting at work, and a coworker's lamenting about their marriage. And you get to go, dude, our church has got a pretty cool system. And they're like, yeah, keyword church, not interested. No, just trust me. I promise they won't embarrass you. Promise they won't shove Jesus down your throat. Just use it. I look forward to telling the stories of not just our own marriages that we helped, but marriages in the community. Have you paid for a marriage counselor lately? Did I just tip my hand by saying I had? I don't know. It's expensive. And we think Christ has answers whether or not someone acknowledges him or not, Finally, there's food share. I think there's remarkable opportunity there, mostly because our friend Steve, who has connections that most humans don't have, he's got a warehouse that he's actually leasing to the food share for the next few months, or the next few years. Here's the catch, though, is Steve has neuropathy and is headed for Mayo Clinic in a week. And so he needs our help to get the place ready. It means that we need to, Steve's got a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to get out of there. There's a lot of retrofitting that needs to happen. And so that'll be the first such project. It's kind of this cool deal because we get to serve our own and we get to serve the working poor. And that's next Saturday, 9 to 1. We'll gather and work our dogs off and call it a day. So there's sign-up sheets out in the lobby. I'll remind you that at the end of the service. We're going to matter again. I'm confident of that. God is opening more and more doors. And quite frankly, really the issue is going to be people, not opportunities. Which raises the question, how are we going to pay for all that? How is God going to resource this movement? If you're a guest, I want to say it's uncomfortable for me as it is for you for me to talk about money. I don't. We don't very often. And if you're, I guess I just want to say this. If you're wondering about our typical posture towards money, I'd point you to a few messages that are available on the info tables. We recognize that one of the biggest hang-ups between God and people's hearts is the, 1-800-BIG-HAIR, right? With me? Flipping through the channels looking for a football game, and next thing you know, you can be blessed. We recognize that tension. And yet at the same time, we're really excited about what God is doing. I'm blown away at the quality of people a part of this movement. It's not supposed to happen like this, people who have been following Jesus for decades and people who have been following him for months. It's a remarkable movement happening. And for that reason, it would be irresponsible for me to not talk about money because, frankly, that's how God resources his kingdom, through his people. And there's no money tree in the Hushka backyard, or the Narrate front yard or anything like that. So we got to talk about this. I called a council guy this week and I was like, do I have to really talk about this? Yeah, Adam, it's once a year you have to talk about this. So here we go. Here's our budget for this year. It's $257,000. If you want one of those that I think it's the coffee people have them, we'd be glad to hand you a budget. That $257 in our view is bare bones. It's a lot of money. But I want you to know that from the council's perspective and the staff's perspective, we've worked really hard on this. It's bare bones. The reason it's bare bones is if we dial it back any further than that, that costs us staff people. And if we cost ourselves staff people, then what we will be is a church who gathers on Sunday. Right? Because the more friendship I've developed with guys who lead churches by themselves, here's the gig. People serve, and they serve a lot in those types of churches. The issue is all the volunteer energy is utilized in executing a worship service. So they can't matter because everyone's tired. Part of what a staff does is absorbs a lot of the weekend work so that you guys can, we can matter in maybe more tangible ways. So, for lack of a better term, it's kind of a make or break number. There's not much margin in it. Okay, but I want to offer a few comments on okay, how do we get there? That works out, by the way, to like $21,500 a month and $5,000 a week. It's the 30% increase over last year's giving. Aggressive, but we decided that we want to be a church that matters and is vibrant, not one that survives. And so here we go. A few comments on that. First of all, I promise you that my posture is not going to change. The Sunday worship service posture around money isn't going to change. What I mean is there's not going to be any cajoling or any if you love Jesus, you would write a check and you'd sell your house. And none of that. I promise you that. About the only thing that's going to change is I'm going to do a better job of once a month kind of going, here's the deal, you guys, here's what last month's giving was, here's where we're at on the year, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do that, first of all, because I think if God is in this, and I think he is, then I wouldn't have to do that, right? I don't want to produce the wind of the Spirit. Either it's there or it's not. Second, frankly, I don't want to contribute to the confusion. I'm proud of the culture that we have here, and I don't want to contribute to the church that talks about money. So where does that leave us? I want you to know this. I don't know who gives what. I don't. And I guess I want you to know that because I want you to know that you don't have to look at the floor when you look at me or anybody else. There's two people in this place who know the specifics of who's giving what, and it's because they're the people who keep our books. And I'm caught in that tension. It might change someday because when I hear there's a $3,000 check in the offering, it bugs me that I don't call them and say thank you. But right now, I don't know who's given what. So what that means is this is a you and God thing. And I mean that really sincerely. I think really the only thing you can do is just simply ask yourself, am I doing what God's asking me to do? Both on a holistic spiritual level and on a specific Narrate level. God's pretty clear, right? Planned or percentage giving, which means we put his kingdom before our own. That it's, again, like I said, planned, which means it's not emotional. It's priority first. It's planned second. It's something we build into our budget, not something we do after we've done the stuff we want to do. And it's proportional, which means it rises as our quality of living rises. But aside from that, guys, I'm confident, and I leave it with you and the Lord and those conversations of, are you doing what God's asking you to do? And please don't look at the floor when you see me or the staff or anyone else because we don't know the specifics. Okay? Okay, now we got to talk about this series, which I'm very excited about. You should have been given one of these when you came in the door, the God Confusion. When we look back on the last year, one of the things that bugs me, frankly, is that we get an average grade at our ability to reach people completely disassociated from church. People who are wrestling with theism, let alone the God of the Bible, And I feel like God wants his church to engage people who are asking deep, probing spiritual questions on a very broad level. And so, hence the series. You can't read that. That's ridiculous. But here's the sermons over the next 7 weeks, starting next week. Why is the search for faith so hard? Next week. Does it really matter what I believe? Next week. What is the relationship between faith and knowledge? 4th week, can I believe in atheism? 5th week is I don't know enough to know, agnosticism. 6th week, do you seriously expect me to think of God as an old man with a long white beard? And 7th week, don't all paths lead to the same God? It'll have a Narrate posture, which won't be telling. It'll be introspective and wondering and inviting people into the conversation. The question is, how do we reach people? If we're going to do a series that's designed to reach people, how do we reach them? Which leads us to a survey we did this summer that Chad made fun of me for, but remember we asked you to go online and take a survey how did you find us? What was the first point of contact? I shouldn't be surprised, but about 75% of you I believe there were like 60 people who took the survey. You found us through relationships. Wouldn't that make sense? Right? Like, we did some great mailers. We did some great billboards. We're known. Like, I don't mean that arrogantly, but like, the name is out there. At the end of the day, people engage in a worship service like this, not because there's, free iPods, not because there's, great music, not because there's whatever, not because they get pub glasses if they marked that it was their first or second time, right? Like, they do it because a friend whom they love and trust invites them. So we wanted to give you a resource in those relationships, and we even created an instructional video for how to use the card. So I invite you to turn your attention to the screen. Of course we're joking, right? Lenny was concerned that you would take it seriously. The design behind this card and the complimentary website is to be a resource to you in the relationships you already have. Like, people who are asking, sincerely asking, who welcome to be a part of the conversation, people who are honestly asking you about Narrate and curious about it. We wanted to put a resource in your hand that, is excellent, that you could use as an invitation. So I leave that with you. I want to talk about Caleb for a few minutes. Caleb, you may recall, was one of the 12 spies of Israel, and as the history of Israel went in the early days, God rescued them from a place called Egypt. He led them out into the desert. At Mount Sinai, he made them his holy priesthood. The plan from there was to enter the Promised Land. You may have heard of it. There's a tiff there from every now and then. He wanted to send them in, and because, he needed a way to figure out the land, and there were no drones. They didn't have any of those fancy Air Force things that they use now. He sent 12 people, 12 spies, the text often calls them, to go into the land, survey the land, get the feel for the land, and come back and give a report. When the guys came back, 10 of them said, no way. Nope. That'd be dumb. Those are big people. Those are real threats. We could really die. We could really bleed. No. 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, those guys are right. That's going to be intense. But God is with us. Let's go do it. And the result was that the 10 won out. The people decided not to go. God in turn said, okay, you don't want to go, you're not going. Now you can't change your mind. Like, until all of you are dead, no one's going. And so for 40 years you get what is known as the wilderness wanderings, right? So at 80 years old, Caleb says this. He's kind of recalling those moments. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land of Canaan. I returned and gave an honest report. But my brothers who went with me frightened the people from entering the promised land. For my part, I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. They entered when Caleb was 80. 5 years later, they started distributing land, which, please know, like, those weren't empty lots subdivided and ready for plumbing and electricity. That was like, those are your people to conquer, and those are your people to conquer, and those are your people to conquer. Caleb said this when they started handing out the land. Now, as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well and has promised me for all these 45 years since Moses made this promise, even while Israel wandered in the wilderness. Today, I'm 85 years old. I'm as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey. Is that possible? No, it's ridiculous. And I can still travel and fight as well as I could then. Again, possible? Not literally. So give me the hill country that the Lord promised me. You'll remember that as scouts we found the descendants of Anak living there in great walled towns. Translation, tough go. But if the Lord is with me, I'll drive them out of the land just as the Lord said. I'm not a military strategist, but I've played Risk, and I've played King of the Hill, and I understand that the high country is the hardest country to take. What we can't miss here, right, is this 85-year-old man didn't ask, for like Shalom acres along the Sea of Galilee. He asked for the hill country. An 85-year-old guy didn't say, I'll take a pina colada on the beach for $500, Alex, right? Like, he said, give me the hill country. Why? Why does an 85-year-old guy do that? Does he maybe understand something that we know both through faith and science now? That the human body and the human brain, it needs challenges. It needs resistance. It needs obstacles. Contrary to what comes to us intuitively, easy street is the road to death, right? did he understand that the vibrant faith he had was the result of saying, give me that mountain? Now, here's my point. In September a year ago, 50 people said, yep, God is in that. Sign me up. Could cost me dearly, might be uncomfortable, but I am personally invested. I'm in. I would submit to you that one of the worst things we could do as a church would be to lose that edge. We didn't call them, but effectively they were a launch team. A launch team is church language for people who start a church, who understand the obstacles, they understand the calling, and they say, sign us up. We're ready for the challenge. We're ready for the risk. I submit to you that as a church, every September, I hope we resurvey the land. I hope every September we're overwhelmed at the challenges facing us. I hope every September we're aggressive in our future and going like, oh boy, guys, we could look really dumb. If God doesn't show up, there is no safety net. People have asked periodically over the year, like, what about membership, Adam? How do I become a member? And I've been hesitant to go there because, first and foremost, I want this to be a community where everyone belongs. So I submit to you that every September, we form launch teams, and that we think of membership in yearly cycles, where we go, guys, here's what God's calling us to. It's going to be risky, it's going to be edgy, it's going to be dangerous. We might not make it. But we think God is in this, and whoever is in it, come on. I say we call those people not members, but launch team members. People who get the edge, they get the vision, and they're personally invested. And we'll invite people to join that as the year goes on, just like many of you did last year. Your faith is only as good as the risks you take on. Let me pray. God, it's a lot of information, God. And we give you credit for our past, and we cling to you in hopes for our future. God, I pray that even in the hearts of people right now, that you would help them very honestly, very candidly survey whether or not they're in, whether or not they're ready to be personally invested. Not that they can't belong and walk with us if they're not. But we think there's value, God, in giving people a chance to say they are. It's in Jesus' name we pray.